right, so in order to do the integration and to make it work, there are a few elements to take into consideration. So in this example, as I documented, the information associated in order to be able to export the data from the EPLAN environment to the Studios 5000 environment, there are a few things we got to state. So the rack has to be stated. So here I have the rack component. So the rack part is in the project. The rack component in the PLC box dialog in the tab, we need to associate the PLC type designation. This is a feature or a function that's very important. And we need to give the module name as well. So the module name is going to be associated here. On every object, on every element, we need to associate at least a minimum of these features here. On the PLC structure data, we will specify what the rack ID is. So the rack ID for this particular rack is going to be called this. Now, this is just a random name I picked, but of course it can be something a little bit more associated. There's additional information you can specify. In this case here for the rack, I don't need to. And of course the part number is associated. On the next case here for the power supply, interestingly enough, the power supply in the Rockwell environment does not need to be associated to the project. So to the programming project, we don't need to associate, but we need to have the module name, the PLC designation, and in the PLC structure data, as you can see, I have no association to that rack. So it's just for information purposes, nothing else. But I will not include the power supply onto my project. Now, for the rest of the modules, and similarly to the rack case, I need to specify a configuration project name. So this is the name of the project I'm going to be using inside my Studios 5000 environment. So I gave it this name, any name you want to pick. And of course, like I stated earlier, for the PLC, for the power supply, nothing needs to be stated because it's not going to be part of the project. The next case where the controller is associated, so the controller information, again, PLC type designation, very important, and also a module name. And as you can see in the PLC structure data, the name of the rack is specified where the card is sitting, and the position, of course, of where that card lies, and of course the name of the project that this particular object is going to belong to. So similar instance for all the other objects as well. So position is going to change, of course, the configuration project name, and of course we're going to give it a PLC type designation as well as a module name. So this has been done for all these different objects. You can confirm this by looking at the PLC navigator. Inside the PLC navigator, you will be able to see all the devices associated in a structured format. So you got your project, you got your rack, and you got all the components that are sitting on that rack. Of course, you can filter for main function here. Just makes the objects look a little bit cleaner so that you know you're only looking at the cards that are inside your project. Okay, so of course, very important, as you can see here, I do not have any project name. Not assigned states that this rack hasn't been assigned. So these objects that you see here are sitting pretty much nowhere. There's no specification made for these right now. So by continuing here with this example, what I can do now is under the PLC function here, I can export data. I'm going to export this configuration. So you have the configuration project name, whichever name or whichever project that you're working on. In a big project, you can have multiple. In a big EPLAN project, you can have different configuration projects created depending on the PLC projects that you're working with. And of course, you're going to export this to a file. So I'm just going to override that file because I've already done that. And once that file has been created and the export goes out, no error messages, so everything's clean and done. Very simple, again, just to keep in mind the logic or the idea behind it is to specify the cards that are sitting on what card, and that card, that rack that needs to have a name associated to it so that you can tell that these cards are sitting on that rack. And of course, give it a project name for your Studios 5000 environment. So once that's done, I will power up my Studios environment. I'm just going to grab a project that's an empty one. And very important is that configuration project name, you need to, I'm going to copy it, or you need to know it at least. Because what's going to happen is that inside the Studios 5000 environment, that will be required. That the name of that project will be required. So the first instance that it's going to ask here, it's going to be what's the name of that project that you want to create. So of course we need to have the same name on both environments. So the layout name here is the same. Once that's done, of course, the architect application will begin. It'll be empty, of course, and I'll be using that EPLAN import functionality here, and I will be able to bring this file that I just created now, and I'll generate it, hit it open. It's going to bring in all the part information, all the component information, maybe some warnings depending on what objects that Studio5000. I'm not necessarily 100% savvy on the environment here. I just know the EPLAN environment, and of course I'm going to hit OK, bring that in. So what I've done is I've created a project with inside the EPLAN environment, exported that file out, and now all the information here is attributed to it, all depending on the information that is, of course, stated. Now in this particular case, I have no aliases, no cards were created in this environment. If I look at my PLC card here, and I look at my project, and I look at, like, let's say, just look at the first card, there's just a USB port. There's no multi-line schematics that were created for these cards, so these are just like probably just a single line diagram with no I/O information or descriptor tag or function text for any of these pins. So of course, if you do have a more complex and elaborate project where you have you know, the pin information, in the example of a 16-point card, that 16-point card information will also be reflected here, and when you select your card, you will have that information associated. All right. So modifications can be done on this environment, and we can export those modifications made, and we will be able to import them back into our project. So in a nutshell, that's the functionality. And again, just a few criteria that you need to abide by. But once you have those criteria down, the export works 100%.